From WKNOW, this is Steve Chanley with One Question Too Many. Today's program is made possible by the law firm of Employer Advocates Group, serving California employers since 2002, with offices in Orange County and San Luis Obispo County, California. eaglawgroup.com. Joining us today is Keith Wetmore. He's the former chair and chief executive partner of Morrison and Foerster and the current managing director of the San Francisco office of the legal search firm Major, Lindsey and Africa. This is the second of a two-part interview with Mr. Wetmore. Thanks for joining us again, Keith.
Of course, Steve.
Where we left off in our first episode was we were discussing how firms use different business strategies that rely on market segmentation and positioning. During that discussion, you referenced something called the Hildebrand Citibank report. Would you explain to our listeners what that is and why that's considered important?
Sure. The Citibank, I think they bank like 85 of the AmLaw 100 firms. They have enormous market coverage in lawyers. And by the way, Wells Fargo is is their biggest competitor probably, but they have whole specialty sections of their banking outfit that works with law firms. So they know the industry very well, and they have access as bankers to those firms to an incredible array of information. And then firms participate because it's really useful to have comparative market knowledge. Firms voluntarily reply to very detailed surveys from Citi. And Citi then uses that at least two ways. One is for the firms themselves who use Citi as their bankers, Citi will put together a set of survey data. So, for example, I can name 6 firms. They have to have at least 5 firms or else you can figure out, they maintain anonymity. But you ask for 5 or 6, for example, peer firms and maybe 5 or 6 aspirational firms. And they give you very detailed information about billing rates by associate class, billing rates for partners, discounting of the top 5 clients, IT costs per lawyer, secretarial ratios, anything the mind can imagine in terms of revenue and expense. They provide in a tailored, anonymized version so you can benchmark yourself against the industry. So that's one very useful thing they do. I think most firms kind of are on the edge of their seat and to get their annual appointment with Citi to figure out how they fared compared to the year before. It's very informative on rate setting, for example. And it helps you argue with your partners because nobody likes increasing billing rates, notwithstanding what clients think we enjoy doing. On the other hand, you really fall behind if you're not keeping up with your peer firms. So it's very useful to have the market data to convince your partners that what you're doing is the right thing to do, whether it's price increases or staffing decreases or whatever pain points you happen to be pressing at the time. The other thing Citi does, and I'm finally getting to your question, the other thing Citi does is with the aggregate data from the AmLaw 200, and also a collection of niche boutique firms that aren't in the AmLaw 200. They put together a report working with Brad Hildebrand, who is probably the first big law firm consultant in the business. And he's been doing it a very long time. He's an astute observer. He's still, Hildebrand Associates is still a well-respected legal consulting firm. And so he works with Citi to put together an annual report on the state of the industry. And Citi uses it for marketing purposes. A footnote here, Citi, I don't know if they make that much money banking law firms, but they make a lot of money banking partners in law firms. And so they use their familiarity with the firms as a means to get banking relationships and investment management relationships with individual law partners. Anyway, the annual survey of the industry, it's an opportunity for Brad and Citibank to make broad observations about who's getting richer, who's getting poorer, sectors that are seeing growth and those that are not seeing growth by region and by practice area and by city in the U.S. So it's a very useful overview of what's happening very broadly in the market.
Sounds like a great resource with a lot of analytics that would be useful in managing a firm. Was that something that you would use back when you were chair of MoFo?
Well, I found, the bespoke comparisons were a lot more useful. I suppose it's useful to see people's observation about the mega trends, if you will, but it's really useful to find out that your peer firms, are operating with, 20% fewer secretaries than you are, because that's something that's actually actionable.
So the most recent Citibank report came out in December of 2024. In projecting growth opportunities and challenges in the year 2025, the report states that law firms surveyed indicated that firms will, quote, continue to focus on three major opportunities in what's expected to be a strong year ahead. These three are increasing their scale, quote, unlocking their platforms, and leveraging the power of generative AI to transform their businesses, unquote. So increasing scale, particularly in advantageous markets, has been a proven law firm strategy for a long time. The other two levers of growth seem rather new. Can you explain what is meant by unlocking a firm's platforms and what that entails?
I think what Brad and Greta at the City were talking about there is it's in the context of firms having grown laterally and having grown geographically and just in scale, to make sure that they are taking advantage of what they've invested in those efforts. In other words, getting value out of lateral partners so that those lateral partners know what the rest of the firm can do for the lateral's clients. Getting the existing partners to know what the new lateral can do for existing firm clients. Making sure that clients know what your full capabilities are. That you're selling terms I know from a consulting firm that I'm associated with, selling the whole stack, selling everything you have to offer. And because there's a lot of evidence that there are great efficiencies in selling another $1 million to a $10 million client compared to generating a $1 million client. And so getting in deeper with your existing clients, making sure the whole firm is being presented at the right opportunities to the existing clients, and that everybody involved knows what the firm can offer. To use an overused expression, it is unlocking the platform is arguably low-hanging fruit in terms of enhancing revenue, because it's making sure you're making the most of what you've already invested in.
Does it surprise you to read that the surveyed firms intended to, quote, transform their businesses, unquote, in 2025 by leveraging generative AI?
I think we have to recognize around AI that nobody wants to look like the fool who is dismissive of it. And so I think whether it's Citi and Brad or a law firm leader, we have to be prepared to be on top of it. We want to seem to be on top of it. We want to communicate to our colleagues that we're on top of it and prepared to jump on it as it evolves. I think you'll see in the same survey, there's very few law firm leaders believed that it was going to change the leverage model. They were open to the idea that it might, but they're not thinking it does in the short term. So I think that kind of reflects the fact that, we're all about AI. What is St. Augustine? Lord, make me chaste, but not quite yet. We're all over AI, but we're still waiting and seeing actually what it means. And I think, and the other thing is, you'll find some law firm leaders who really, to date myself, use this verb, they grok on presenting themselves as being innovative. If they describe themselves as a leader, that would be one of their favorite words. That's not true uniformly, but it's true of a number of them. And, there's nothing like AI right now to make you seem innovative than sounding like you're going to be on the cutting edge. My observation about technology generally in the law has been that there have always been third-party providers competing with a lot of spend to create the best products to sell to law firms. And because the practice of law, we tell ourselves every firm is different, but in many, many ways, the practice of law at one firm is quite similar to what happens at the next. And similarly, the use of the same technology can be adapted. So I guess the topic sentence of this whole diatribe on my part is that it does not generally, in my experience, behoove a firm to develop bespoke technological solutions. That there are lots of startups for the law industry. There are aggregators like Reed Elsevier, LexisNexis will happily, when those startups demonstrate success, they are acquired by those aggregators of legal technology, and then that technology is actively sold. And you find a whole lot of many, many law firms are using the same technology platforms. And I think that's what we'll see in AI. There's going to be a lot of money spent on it. I just think most law firms are smart enough not to spend their own money. They will happily be licensees of technology as the technology develops.
So separate and apart from some of the emerging technologies that are coming out, do you believe that the market forces are considerably different for law firms now than they were, say, 10 years ago?
I don't think so. The trends we spoke about last time continue to be the case. The AmLaw 75 chooses to price itself such that those firms are not competing for everything a company needs done in the legal department. And over time, they keep choosing to price themselves in a way that probably makes for a smaller section of the market, not necessarily a smaller spend, but a smaller portion of the legal work that gets sent out. And that leads to those higher billing rates, leads to higher profitability and higher partner income. And so rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat.
Most recent Citibank report talks about the current challenges law firms face in the post-COVID world of, quote, restoring and retaining their distinctive firm culture. Do you believe that having a distinctive firm culture is important?
I think the belief in one's distinctive culture is important. When I talk to law firms, one thing I get to do now as a recruiter that I didn't have the experience to do when I was running MoFo is to go and meet with the leaders of firms and hear them talk about their firms and what makes them special. And I'll tell you, 95% of those meetings, people talk about their culture. And whether those cultures are in fact that different from each other, I guess one would have to move between firms to really know that for sure. I surmise they're probably not quite as different as people think. There are some real differences. That's definitely true. But a lot of the things that I hear of as distinctive qualities of a firm's culture, I hear from other firms as the distinctive qualities of their culture as well. So the distinctiveness, I'm not sure is as important as the belief in a culture that there are ways we do things here. And certainly most firms pride themselves on training young lawyers on how to be good lawyers. I would argue that law firms play a unique role in the legal ecosystem, the legal intelligence ecosystem, in that we are the only place that transforms wet behind the ear law school grads into functioning lawyers. Legal department, I know Intel made headlines when they hired 3 people right out of law school. And the big firms of America sweat out that many first years in the first 6 months. So we played a unique role. And that, I think, was really badly impaired by the COVID experience. People had to learn by osmosis rather than sitting down at a table with somebody marking up their draft. And I think that's a very different experience. I worry that there was a generation of lawyers, if you will, generation not quite accurate, we'll call it a cohort of lawyers who also lost the ability to know how to train younger lawyers than themselves because they didn't have that kind of one-on-one mentorship taking place. So I, for one, cheer the law firms that are insisting people come back to the office a lot. And actually, what I hear anecdotally quite uniformly is that the youngest lawyers want that very much. Summer associates are showing up every day. First year associates are anxious to be in the office. It's this lost cohort of now fourth years that got very accustomed to working in pajamas and, are rebel against being compelled to show up. Now, in fairness, some of those people also were encouraged to move to distant locations and now find themselves being compelled to come back to the office. So there are certainly individual circumstances that I'm sympathetic to, but I think by and large, getting the butts back in the chairs is a really good thing for the profession. It's good for the lawyers involved, and it's good for firm culture because it's, I think, very hard to impart culture over Zoom.
In terms of talent acquisition, do you believe that it's still a good strategy to attempt to attract the best and the brightest through the use of a favorable business culture?
Yes, I mean, people, law students care. They ask questions a lot about things about the firm's pro bono practices. They ask about the smart ones ask about training. Smart ones ask about how do you tend to staff matters. Am I going to see a client in the first year? Um, and all those things are part of what a firm sells in its recruiting efforts. And it's still very much a business where I think the smartest advocates win just a little bit more.
Back when I was an associate in the Stone Age, there was a term you're probably familiar with. It was called the MoFo difference,
Yes,
having to
yes,
do with the firm's culture. Can you explain that a
yes.
little bit?
Well, I'll start with a disclaimer that um, I've had people complain that I was doing in the MoFo difference, like when I started charging 25 cents for Coca-Colas. It got trotted out a lot whenever anything that the person complaining didn't like was happening. That somehow that was the end of the MoFo difference. So I did actually do a little essay once that I shared about what I thought the MoFo difference meant. I think I began by saying most of the traits I'm about to describe are shared by very many firms. And the question is, to what extent are they the lived religion of the firm as opposed to merely giving lip service? I think it was a range of things. It involved respect for individuals, respect for individual differences, a complete devotion to client service. So it was, in other words, resisting compelled uniformity in work style or in work appearance. I think it included a very active pro bono program that gave pro bono work equal dignity to client paying work. Involved in viewing the law as a profession that holding the keys to the gates of justice compels lawyers to behave in a fashion that's beyond just mercenary. So those were things that come to mind as I recount that little essay I put together.
Still have that essay?
It's probably lost somewhere in the document retention system at Morrison and Foerster.
I was going to ask you if you ever find it, if you wouldn't mind posting it on LinkedIn. I think that would be a very interesting read.
Well, I also, of course, want to be very careful about not. I think I also observed that. I mean, for example, at one point, people would have said the MoFo difference was in the 70s and 80s. The firm prided itself on having an open partnership, meaning we made decisions about promoting people into the partnership without regard to the economic needs of the practice. I actively drilled that out of the MoFo culture because I thought it was not serving us in the modern era. It might have been very important during some rampant growth periods in the 70s that it became uneconomic at some point. I'm always careful not to embarrass my successors by trying to hold them to standards that seemed appropriate at the time.
During your time as chair at MoFo, how many new offices did you open?
Um, I think just Beijing and Shanghai. Well, no, San Diego was just a little bit before me, and Berlin was just a little bit after I stepped down as chair. I I played a significant role in it, in setting up that office, but it was after I was chair.
So, in addition to opening new offices, you also expanded the firm's footprint by acquiring lateral talent. What were some of the challenges that you faced in integrating lateral partners in terms of the firm's culture?
Yes, and a lot of this is an area where a lot of firms have done a great deal of, they've invested a lot of energy in better lateral integration. And in hindsight, I think we probably could have done, I think there's a lot more I could have done. A big part of it, frankly, extensive interviewing, as burdensome as it is to the candidate, is actually a pretty important part of lateral integration, because people who don't know law firms, it's very common for a lateral partner to interview 25, 30 or more partners. There are some firms where there are some firms where you interview even a much longer list. Latham famously, at one point in its history, you interviewed every partner. And Covington and Burling, for example, today you interview an awful long list of partners. So anyway, that intake process is itself part of integration, because those are interviews where you're talking about your practice and you're educating, you're learning about other existing partners' practices. You're educating those existing partners about your practice. People inevitably talk about client synergies in those meetings. I met with, as I was referencing earlier, a lot of vendors for specialized law firm software. I remember a vendor with a product that was specifically designed to make sure that the things that get talked about in the interviewing process actually happen. In other words, when the candidate and the head of your investment management group talk about people they both know at B of A and about how they could develop more work from the bank, to set up automatically ticklers that will check in a month to see if those meetings have happened yet. So I think extensive interviewing is definitely part of it. Ownership of candidates is very important. And by that, I mean, who's the sponsor, whose job it is to be following up the candidate to make sure that the candidate is feeling attended to make sure that synergies that were pitched in the sponsor memo for that partner candidate, that those synergies are being exploited. In a perfect world, your sponsors would be actively pursuing that. In a perfect world, the leadership of the firm would be checking in with those sponsors and checking in with the candidates to make sure it's all on track. Did I do that perfectly in every instance? God, no, but sometimes. So, I think, I think the industry has evolved for, just in recognition of how much money is at stake bringing in a lateral partner. The recruiting fees, are one thing, but then it's just the compensation of the lateral partner, the cost when a lateral partner fails, because then you've got months and months of compensation at, lowered productivity than what you paid for. So there are a lot of reasons to improve the lateral integration process. And I think firms have professionalized that. That's the term I use for taking it out of the lawyer's hands. I think they've got non-practicing lawyers or non-lawyers managing that process to make sure that the synergies that were promoted as the rationale for a candidacy actually get exploited.
When I was working at MoFo in the Palo Alto office, the firm acquired an entire boutique law firm, an IP firm called Ciotti and Mirashige. And being an associate, I was not involved in any of the negotiations that took place, but I marveled at how easily that firm was absorbed into the Palo Alto office, and it seemed pretty seamless. I don't know if you recall what went into that, but I would consider that a success.
Yes, it was a great success, and we were one of the first firms through that combination. We were one of the first firms to incorporate a patent prosecution practice into a full-service firm. It had been, before then, it had been quite nichey and quite separate, and it was a very effective way for MoFo to get head start on IP to distinguish itself in the IP litigation space. I would note, apropos of my remarks about sponsorship, that combination, I think it worked so well in large part because the sponsor for that combination was Michael Jacobs, who was an extraordinarily talented IP litigator. At the time, he was a young IP litigator. He's kind of my vintage and recently retired and is now at JAMS, for anyone listening who wants an amazing mediator. But Michael is the sort of person who, when he takes things on, he does them well, and he did that integration very well.
So you were the chair at Morrison for about 12 years.
Right.
Did you feel the weight of expectation when you accepted that role? You were following in the footsteps of leaders such as Bob Raven, who later went on to become the president of the American Bar Association. He was a towering figure.
Back when that was a big deal. Yes, I mean, immensely so. And particularly when I became chair, it was not something one campaigned for. I think for worse, better or worse, that has evolved a little, but it kind of came as a shock to me that people wanted me to do it. And I was also a little early in my career, so the implications to my practice were a little troubling. As I like to say, it all turned out okay. Unfortunately, I guess people thought I was good at it, so being able to do it for 12 years, which is basically 4 3-year terms, got me to a point in life where I didn't need to go back into practice. But anyway, yes, it was a tremendous responsibility. I remember at one point, an early crisis, I remember Richard Nixon's, if you're old enough to remember, 6 crises. I haven't counted. I think I probably have more than 6 genuine crises. But my first was just a few months after I became chair of the firm. And I remember thinking, I've been handed this extraordinary thing, this delicate thing, and I've dropped it. I've screwed it up. Again, it all turned out okay.
What are some of the accomplishments that you were most proud of during your leadership at MoFo?
I had felt there was a sense in the partnership that those things that we thought that the MoFo difference points, the collaborative culture, the commitment to pro bono, the rewarding of people who do the work as opposed to merely those who generate the work, that those qualities of the place that made it a good place to work were the factors that held us back financially from competing at the very top end of the profession. And so I was quite pleased, I think, to demonstrate that we were able to basically double the top line and triple the profit of the firm without, I don't think, abandoning those things that made MoFo a great place to work. So these qualities were things that propelled us higher in the practice as opposed to holding us back.
Do you believe that at some point in the evolution of the practice of law as an industry, that there has become a change from it being a profession to business?
I think you certainly find that in the, you find that out there. I think it varies by firm to some extent. I think it varies by practice to some extent. But yes, the competitiveness of compensation, I think, has not been good for the professionalism of the practice. You now have to have systems where you pay superstar money. If you're not doing that, I don't care how damn good your culture is, you're probably not holding on to your best people, or you can't hold on to all your best people. And so, it means that instead of a system where people at the top end are generally well taken care of, but you're not really rewarding the superstars in their superstar years, that I don't think it generally doesn't work much anymore.
You've been involved in many social and philanthropic initiatives. Would you tell us something about that? Let me try that again. You've been involved in many social and philanthropic initiatives. Would you tell us something about that?
Sure, I spent a decade on the board of the San Francisco AIDS Foundation, and due to the many, many friends I lost in the late 80s, early 90s, I always saw HIV-related causes as being very close to my heart. Felt that I was a lucky gay man who'd been, who benefited from a Passover, if you will. And so that was during the 90s, I spent a lot of effort around that. In recent times, I spent a decade on the board and chaired the board of the San Francisco SPCA. Animal welfare is something I care very much about, and I'm impressed. Both organizations, actually, I'm proud of things they both share, which is they both, using the metaphor, kind of the pebble in the pond, they each are organizations that were capable of things much beyond the geographic 7 mile by 7 mile chunk of land that is San Francisco, and accordingly took on much broader issues. So the AIDS Foundation had an Africa initiative. The San Francisco SPCA is working statewide now with shelters across the state to improve the lives of shelter animals. And so I'm proud of being associated with things that start in San Francisco but are too good to keep there.
How important do you think it is for every attorney to devote at least some time to public service and societally beneficial causes?
I think it's part of what is being a decent human being, not just, a decent lawyer. I learned a lot being involved with other well-run organizations. Well, actually, you learn something from being involved with badly run organizations too. Neither of the two I served on the board of deserve that painful description. They're both actually they were fabulous. They're well run at the time, but you learn things. There are techniques I learned from watching Pat Kristen run the AIDS Foundation board that I took back to MoFo. And so I think that's true in many other parts of life. I would not have had to been running MoFo to have things that I learned. I think just engagement beyond your own household broadens your perspective.
Now, Keith, I'm just dying to know this. Have you ever asked that one question too many?
I don't think so. I guess the closest I ever came, I witnessed someone ask one question too many of me when the only time I've ever been a witness in a trial, which was from a fellow who'd crawled into my house on Castro Street in San Francisco, crawled in through the doggy door. He was not a well person. But anyway, he spent the night sleeping on the floor in the entryway and was only discovered by my housekeeper the next morning. Gave everyone quite a start, as you might imagine. And when I challenged him, he crawled back out through the doggy door, taking with him a bottle of wine. And he was still in the backyard when the police arrived. He was arrested. I testified. And of course, at a criminal trial in San Francisco Superior Court, there's no witness prep. So the prosecutor held up the bottle of red wine covered in fingerprint dust and asked, "Is this," like a very Perry Mason moment, "is this the bottle of wine that you saw the defendant take out of your home?" And that was apparently a critical part of the trial. And I said, "Well, it's the same vintage and the same varietal. I have no way of knowing whether it's possibly the exact same bottle." And of course, the right answer was yes, but I didn't give the required answer.
So you couldn't tell whether it was from your collection?
It was a commonly available bottle of wine. I'm sure it was. I'm sure it was the same bottle. But I went all lawyer on him instead of victim.
So it wasn't a first growth Bordeaux or anything?
Oh, no. It was a bottle of Shiraz. Probably $2 Chuck or something similar.
Keith, would you tell our listeners the best way to reach you?
Sure. I'm eminently Googleable. You will find, I think if you just push in Keith Wetmore, I think there's a Keith Wetmore who's a race car driver in South Africa, but otherwise I'm the only Keith Wetmore on the planet. And my Major Lindsey website ID comes up. plus another couple of LinkedIn, of course, the major Lindsey website.
Keith, thank you again for joining us. I really appreciate it.
It's been a real pleasure to talk with you, Steve.